Hello. So people quite frequently ask me if I can give a simple explanation of what fractal theology is. Well, this is my attempt. And let's begin by asking the question, what is a fractal? Well, a fractal is a shape, a pattern, an idea, or a thing that has self-similarity. Self-similarity means that its parts are similar to the whole of it. So fractals can be self-similar to many, many levels of scale, and they're a useful way of describing things in the world that don't look like squares and triangles, etc. And they're a relatively simple way of describing very complicated things and describing them with a lot more accuracy than you can using those squares and triangles. For example, a tree could be described as a green sphere on top of a brown cylinder, but that would be a very poor description of a tree. We could, however, describe a tree far more accurately in terms of how its twigs and branches divide and subdivide at each level in a way that is similar to the shape of the whole tree. All we need to know is where the shoots come out from the branch and the angle of divide and the relative change of size at each level of division, because that relative change will be the same at each level. From these bits of information, we can build a pretty accurate image of an entire tree just by adding a few random elements. In theory, a fractal can be infinitely self-similar and perfect, but in the real world, fractals are limited to the number of levels that are possible in that situation, and they're affected by variables and imperfections. However, those imperfections can also be fractal in nature, and so very realistic theoretical models of real-world situations and objects could be made by applying several fractal formulas to each other. So, next question, what is theology? Well, theology quite simply is the study of God. It is the exploring of ideas about God and exploring conversations that people have about God. It is often, but not always, a word used to describe conversations about God as seen by Christians, Jews, and Muslims. However, theology is not just a subject studied in schools and university. Theology is also what happens every time somebody makes a decision based on what they believe. And in some ways, if you think about it, every decision that has ever been made is theology, because we all live on the basis of what we believe about the world around us, even if that theology is that there is no God. So, what is fractal theology? Well, fractal theology recognizes that if the universe is God's creation, and God's creation is better described using fractals, then obviously God's actions and intentions in general will be better described in a fractal way. Now, fractal theology explores how the created world, how our actions as believers, or how our religious organizations follow patterns that are similar to descriptions of God and descriptions of God's instructions to us. Fractal theology explores how these patterns are repeated in various ways in our lives, in our churches, and in the way that we treat each other. Fractal theology asks why these patterns don't always match up. Does our image of God need correcting? Does our response to that image need correcting? Or is it a little bit of both? Fractal theology sees the kingdom of God, as spoken of in the Gospels, as less of an earthly kingdom and more as a people ruled by good patterns of living that are rooted in patterns of their Creator.